Maria pulled her old coat tighter around her body. The wind was cold and cut through the thin fabric like a knife. She sat on the concrete steps outside a fancy restaurant called Antonio's Fine Dining. Her stomach hurt from hunger. She had not eaten a real meal in 3 days. The coat she wore used to be beautiful. It was black wool with silver buttons. She had bought it 5 years ago when she had money. When she had a different life. Now the coat was dirty and torn. One of the silver buttons was missing. The fabric was stained with coffee and rain and tears. Maria looked at the people walking by on the busy street. They wore expensive clothes and carried designer bags. They talked on their phones about business meetings and dinner plans. They walked fast like they had important places to go. None of them looked at her. She held a piece of cardboard in her hands. She had written on it with a black marker she found in a trash can. The word said, "Anything helps." God bless. The cardboard was getting soft from the rain earlier that day. The letters were starting to run. A man in a business suit walked past her. He was talking loudly on his phone about stock prices. Maria looked up at him with hopeful eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly. "Could you spare some change for food?" The man looked down at her with disgust. He shook his head and walked faster. He covered his phone with his hand and said something to the person on the other end. Maria heard him say the word homeless before he disappeared into the crowd. A woman with a small child came next. The little girl had blonde curls and wore a pink dress. She looked at Maria with curious eyes. "Mommy, why is that lady sitting on the ground?" The child asked. The mother grabbed the child's hand tighter. "Don't look at her, sweetie," the woman said. "She's dangerous. Stay close to me." They hurried past without looking back. Maria felt tears start to form in her eyes. She was not dangerous. She was just hungry and cold and tired. She was a person, just like them, but they could not see that. They only saw her dirty clothes and her cardboard sign. She remembered when she was different, when she was someone people respected, when she wore beautiful dresses and played piano in concert halls. People used to clap for her. They used to say her name with admiration. "Maria Santos," they would whisper. The brilliant pianist from Spain. That felt like a lifetime ago now. Maybe it was a lifetime ago. The person she used to be felt like a stranger now. That woman had an apartment with a view of the city. She had a closet full of elegant clothes. She had a bank account with money in it. She had friends who invited her to parties and dinners. Most importantly, that woman had her music. She practiced piano 8 hours every day. Her fingers knew exactly where to go on the keys. She could play Mozart and Chopin and Beethoven like she was speaking her native language. Music was her life. It was who she was. Then everything changed. It started when her mother got sick. Cancer, the doctor said. Maria spent all her savings on treatments that did not work. She sold her jewelry and her furniture. She borrowed money from friends. When her mother died anyway, Maria fell into a dark place. She started drinking wine to forget the pain. At first it was just 1 glass at night. Then it was 2 glasses. Then it was a whole bottle. Soon she was drinking during the day too. Her hand shook when she tried to play piano. She missed rehearsals. She canceled concerts. Her manager fired her. Her friends stopped calling. She could not pay her rent. The landlord made her leave her apartment. She had to sell her piano to buy food. Watching the moving men take away her beautiful grand piano was like watching them take away her soul. For 6 months now, she had been living on the streets. She slept in doorways and under bridges. She ate from garbage cans when she could find food. She begged for coins from strangers who treated her like she was invisible. The hardest part was losing her identity. She was no longer Maria Santos, the pianist. She was just another homeless woman that people stepped around on the sidewalk. She had become nothing, but deep inside she still remembered the music. Sometimes at night when the city was quiet, she would close her eyes and play piano in her mind. Her fingers would move in the air, pressing invisible keys. She could hear every note perfectly in her head. The music was still there, buried under all the pain and shame and hunger. A young couple walked by holding hands and laughing. They were dressed nicely and looked happy. They reminded Maria of herself when she was young and full of dreams. The woman wore a red dress that looked expensive. The man wore a suit and tie. "Please," Maria said as they approached, "I haven't eaten today. Could you help me buy some food?" The couple stopped for a moment. The woman looked at Maria with what might have been sympathy. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $5 bill. "Here," she said, handing Maria the money. I hope things get better for you. Thank you, Maria said, her voice breaking with emotion. Thank you so much. The couple walked away quickly like they were embarrassed. But Maria did not care. $5 meant she could eat today. Maybe she could buy a sandwich and a cup of coffee. Hot food that would warm her empty stomach. She looked at the money in her hand and felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. It was small and fragile, like a tiny flame in the darkness. But it was there. As the sun began to set, more people walked by on their way to dinner. Maria watched them through the windows of Antonio's restaurant. They sat at tables covered with white cloths. They ate food from fancy plates. They drank wine from crystal glasses. They looked warm and safe and happy. Maria wondered if any of them had ever lost everything. If any of them knew what it felt like to fall so far that they forgot who they used to be. Probably not. Most people lived their whole lives without ever having to sleep on concrete or beg for food. But Maria knew that life could change in an instant. One day you could be playing piano for hundreds of people, and the next day you could be sitting on cold steps hoping someone would give you enough money to eat. The restaurant looked busy tonight. People were laughing and talking inside. Maria could smell the food cooking. Her stomach growled loudly. She clutched the $5 bill tighter and tried to decide what to do next. The next day, Maria returned to the same spot outside Antonio's restaurant. She had spent the $5 on a small sandwich and a cup of coffee the night before. The food had tasted better than anything she could remember. But now she was hungry again. She sat on the concrete steps with her cardboard sign. The morning was busy with people rushing to work. They wore dark suits and carried briefcases. They walked fast and talked on their phones. Most of them did not even notice Maria sitting there. A man with gray hair and expensive shoes stopped in front of her. He looked down at her with cold eyes. "You again," he said with anger in his voice. "I saw you here yesterday. Don't you have somewhere else to go?" "I'm sorry, sir," Maria said quietly. "I'm just trying to get enough money for food." The man shook his head. "Get a job," he said loudly. "Stop being lazy and go find work like everyone else." Other people on the street turned to look. Some of them nodded in agreement. "I'm trying, sir," Maria said. "It's hard to find work when you don't have an address or clean clothes." "That's not my problem," the man replied. He walked into the restaurant shaking his head. Through the window, Maria could see him talking to other customers inside. They kept looking out at her and frowning. A woman with blonde hair and a fur coat came out of the restaurant. She had been inside eating breakfast. She saw Maria and made a disgusted face. "This is terrible," she said to her friend. "How can they let people like this sit here?" "It ruins the whole experience, I know," her friend agreed. "When I pay good money for a meal, I don't want to see beggars outside the window. It makes me sick." The blonde woman walked over to Maria. "You need to leave," she said. "You're making the customers uncomfortable. This is a nice restaurant." "I'm not bothering anyone," Maria said. "I'm just sitting here quietly." "Just sitting here?" the woman said with a laugh. "You're begging. You're asking people for money. That's bothering everyone." More people started to gather around. They came out of the restaurant to see what was happening. Some of them took out their phones to record video. They wanted to capture the drama. "Look at her," someone said from the crowd. "She probably spends any money she gets on drugs or alcohol." "These people are all the same," another person added. "They choose to live this way." Maria felt her face get hot with shame. She wanted to tell them they were wrong. She wanted to explain that she used to be someone important, that she had talent and education and dreams, but she knew they would not believe her. A young mother pushed her way through the crowd. She had a baby in a stroller and a small boy holding her hand. When the boy saw Maria, he tugged on his mother's coat. "Mommy, why is everyone being mean to that lady?" the child asked. The mother looked embarrassed. She pulled the boy closer to her. "Come on, Tommy," she said. "We need to go. Don't talk to strangers," but the boy kept looking at Maria with curious eyes. "She looks sad, Mommy. Maybe we should help her." "No," the mother said firmly. "These people are dangerous. They might hurt you. Stay away from them." The mother hurried away with her children, but her words stayed in the air like poison. Dangerous. That's what people thought when they looked at Maria. They did not see a person who was hungry and cold. They saw a threat. Inside the restaurant, Tony Marcelli watched the scene through the window. Tony owned Antonio's fine dining. His father had started the restaurant 40 years ago. Tony had been running it for the last 15 years. He took pride in providing an elegant dining experience for his customers. The restaurant was Tony's life. He worked 16 hours a day to make sure everything was perfect. The food had to be delicious. The service had to be excellent. The atmosphere had to be refined and peaceful. He could not let anything ruin that. And right now, the homeless woman outside was ruining everything. He could see his customers pointing at her and complaining. They were upset. Some of them looked like they might leave without finishing their meals. Tony had worked too hard to let this happen. He had spent years building his reputation. Food critics from magazines and newspapers came to his restaurant. Rich and famous people ate at his tables. He could not afford to have them scared away by a beggar. He walked to the window and looked out at Maria. She sat with her head down, clutching her cardboard sign. The crowd around her was getting bigger and louder. People were taking pictures with their phones. This was turning into a circus. Tony's assistant manager, David, came up beside him. "Boss, what should we do?" David asked. "The customers are really upset. Mrs. Patterson said she might not come back if we don't do something." Mrs. Patterson was one of their best customers. She came to the restaurant 3 times a week and always ordered expensive wine. She brought her wealthy friends with her. Losing her would be a disaster for business. "I know," Tony said with frustration. "But what can I do? She's not on our property. She's on the public sidewalk. Maybe you could talk to her," David suggested. "Ask her to move somewhere else," Tony nodded. That seemed like the only option. He straightened his tie and walked toward the front door. He had to handle this carefully. He did not want to seem cruel, but he had to protect his business. Outside, the crowd was getting more aggressive. A man in a business suit was yelling at Maria. "You people are ruining this neighborhood," he said. "Why don't you go somewhere else?" "Yeah," a woman added. "There are shelters for people like you. Go there instead." Maria tried to explain that the shelters were full, but no one wanted to listen. They just wanted her to disappear. She felt smaller and smaller as more people joined in the criticism. Then she heard a voice that made her heart stop. "Excuse me," the voice said. "What's going on here?" Maria looked up and saw a man with kind eyes and graying hair. He was well dressed but not fancy. He had a notebook in his hand and a press badge hanging from his neck. Maria could read the words "Food Critic" on the badge. "Oh, Mr. Richardson," someone from the crowd said. "We're just trying to get this woman to move along. She's bothering the restaurant customers." James Richardson was the most important food critic in the city. His reviews could make or break a restaurant. If he wrote a bad review, people would stop coming. If he wrote a good review, the restaurant would be booked for months. Tony's heart sank when he saw Richardson. This was supposed to be a surprise visit. Richardson was here to review Antonio's for his newspaper column. And instead of seeing a peaceful, elegant restaurant, he was seeing an angry mob yelling at a homeless woman. "I see," Richardson said, looking around at the crowd. "And what exactly has this woman done to deserve all this anger?" The people looked at each other uncertainly. "Well," one man said, "she's asking for money. She's begging. She's making people uncomfortable," a woman added. Richardson nodded slowly. He looked at Maria sitting on the steps. She looked scared and ashamed. Her clothes were dirty and her hair was messy, but there was something in her eyes that caught his attention. Something that looked like dignity trying to survive. "Has she threatened anyone?" Richardson asked. "Has she been aggressive or rude?" The crowd was quiet for a moment. "No," someone finally admitted. "But she doesn't belong here." Richardson felt sick listening to this. He had seen poverty before, but he had never seen people react with such cruelty. These were educated, wealthy people. They should know better. Tony finally came outside. He walked through the crowd toward Maria. His face was stern but not angry. He knew he had to handle this situation carefully, especially with Richardson watching. "Ma'am," Tony said to Maria, "I'm the owner of this restaurant. I'm afraid you're going to have to move along." Maria looked up at Tony with tired eyes. She could see he was not a cruel man. His voice was firm but not mean. Still, her heart broke a little more. She had hoped she could stay here for just one more day. This spot was safer than most places she had tried. "Please, sir," Maria said softly. "I'm not causing any trouble. I just need a place to sit." Tony felt uncomfortable. The crowd was watching him. Richardson, the food critic, was watching too. Everyone wanted to see what he would do. He had to think about his business, but he also felt sorry for this woman. I understand, Tony said, but my customers are complaining. You're affecting my business. I have to ask you to find somewhere else to go. Maria nodded slowly. She understood. She had been kicked out of many places before. Store owners, security guards, police officers. They all said the same thing. Move along. Go somewhere else. But there was never really anywhere else to go. She started to stand up, her legs shaky from sitting on the cold concrete. But then she stopped. Something inside her refused to give up. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the last bit of pride she had left. Whatever it was, it made her look Tony in the eyes. Wait, Maria said. Before I go, can I ask you for one chance? Tony frowned. What do you mean? The crowd leaned in closer to hear what she would say. Some of them were still recording with their phones. They expected her to beg for money or make excuses. They did not expect what came next. I see you have a piano inside your restaurant, Maria said. She pointed through the window at the beautiful black grand piano in the corner of the dining room. Let me play one song for your customers. Just one song, the crowd laughed. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. A homeless woman wanting to play piano in a fancy restaurant? It was ridiculous. Are you serious? The blonde woman with the fur coat said, You think you can just walk into a nice restaurant and play their piano? Who do you think you are? This is getting crazy, another person said. Someone call the police. But Maria kept looking at Tony. If your customers don't like what they hear, I'll leave immediately. I promise I'll never come back to this area again. But if they do like it, she paused, swallowing her pride. All I ask for is one hot meal. Tony stared at her in shock. This was not what he had expected. He looked at the piano through the window. It was his pride and joy. His father had bought it when he first opened the restaurant. Only professional musicians had ever played it during special events. Lady, that piano cost more than most people's cars, Tony said. I can't just let anyone touch it. I understand it's valuable, Maria said. I promise I'll be careful with it. I know how to treat instruments with respect. The crowd was getting louder now. People were calling out suggestions and complaints. Some said Tony should call the police. Others said he should just make her leave. A few people said they would never eat at the restaurant again if he let a homeless person inside. But Richardson, the food critic, was watching Maria closely. There was something about the way she looked at the piano. Her eyes had changed when she saw it. They lit up in a way that seemed strange for someone who was supposed to be just a beggar. How do you know about pianos? Richardson asked her. Maria turned to look at him. For the first time since this whole thing started, someone was asking her a real question. Someone wanted to know something about her as a person. I used to play, she said simply. Used to play what? Chopsticks? Someone in the crowd called out with a laugh. Maria ignored the comment. She kept looking at Richardson. I studied classical piano for 20 years. I performed in concert halls across Europe. The laughter from the crowd got louder. People thought she was lying or crazy. A homeless woman claiming to be a concert pianist? It sounded like a fantasy. Right, the man in the business suit said. And I'm the President of the United States. She's obviously making this up, the blonde woman added. Probably hoping for sympathy money. But Richardson was not laughing. He had interviewed hundreds of musicians over the years. He knew how to spot real talent. There was something in Maria's voice when she talked about music. Something that seemed genuine. What pieces can you play? Richardson asked. Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven, Debussy? Maria replied without hesitation. Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Brahms. I can play from memory or read sheet music. Tony looked confused. These were names he had heard before, but he did not know much about classical music. He could tell that Maria was not just making up random words, though. She said the names with confidence and respect. This is ridiculous, David, Tony's assistant manager whispered in his ear. Don't let her manipulate you. She's probably con artist, Tony felt torn. His practical side agreed with David. This seemed like a crazy idea. Let a homeless woman play their expensive piano? His insurance probably would not cover any damage she might cause. But another part of him was curious. What if she really could play? What if she was telling the truth about her background? He had heard stranger stories before. Even if you can play, Tony said to Maria, this is a business. My customers come here for a peaceful dining experience. They don't want to be part of some experiment. I understand, Maria said, but music brings peace to people. It touches their hearts. Maybe your customers would enjoy hearing something beautiful while they eat. Richardson stepped forward. Actually, I think this could be interesting, he said to Tony. I've been reviewing restaurants for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this before. Tony's eyes widened. Richardson was the most important critic in the city. If he thought this was interesting, maybe it would not be a disaster for business. Maybe it could even be good publicity. You want me to let her play? Tony asked Richardson. I think it could make for a fascinating story, Richardson replied. What's the worst that could happen? If she can't play, we'll know in 30 seconds. If she can play now, he shrugged. Well, then you've given someone a chance to share their talent. The crowd was divided now. Some people were angry that anyone was even considering this idea. They wanted Maria removed immediately. But others were getting curious. They wanted to see what would happen. A young couple who had been eating breakfast inside the restaurant came outside to see what the noise was about. What's going on? The woman asked. This homeless lady wants to play the piano inside, someone explained. She claims she's some kind of classical musician. The young woman looked at Maria with interest. Really, that's amazing. I love classical music. Her boyfriend nodded. Let her try. What's the harm? More customers were coming outside now. The whole situation was creating a scene that was hard to ignore. Tony realized that either way, his restaurant was already the center of attention. Maybe letting Maria play would actually be better than just making her leave. If I let you do this, Tony said to Maria, you have to promise that you'll leave quietly if it doesn't work out. No arguments. No causing more trouble. I promise, Maria said, her voice filled with hope for the first time in months. Tony looked at Richardson again. The critic nodded encouragingly. Tony thought about his father, who had always believed in giving people chances. His father had hired employees that other restaurant owners would not consider. He had always said that everyone deserved respect. All right, Tony said finally. One song. But if my customers complain, you leave immediately. The crowd reacted with surprise. Some people were excited to see what would happen. Others were angry that Tony was giving in to what they saw as manipulation. This is a mistake, the blonde woman said. You'll regret this. But Tony had made his decision. He started walking toward the restaurant door. Come on, he said to Maria. Let's see what you can do. Maria followed Tony toward the restaurant entrance. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She had not been inside a nice restaurant in over a year. She had forgotten what it felt like to walk through doors that were not shelter doors or bathroom doors in public places. The crowd followed behind them. Some people wanted to see the show. Others wanted to make sure nothing bad happened. Richardson walked beside Maria, still holding his notebook. He was definitely going to write about this, whatever happened. When Tony opened the glass door, Maria smelled the most wonderful smells. Fresh bread, garlic and herbs, coffee and wine. Her empty stomach clenched with hunger, but she tried to focus on why she was here. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. Inside the restaurant, customers looked up from their meals. They had heard the noise outside, but they did not know what was happening. Now they saw their fellow diners coming back inside, followed by a homeless woman in dirty clothes. What's going on? An elderly man asked his wife. They had been eating Eggs Benedict and reading the newspaper. I have no idea, the woman replied. She put down her coffee cup and stared at Maria with curious eyes. Tony walked to the middle of the dining room. All the conversation stopped. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for an explanation. He felt nervous. This was either going to be a great idea or a terrible mistake. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony announced, I apologize for the interruption. This woman has asked for a chance to play our piano. She says she's a classical musician. I've agreed to let her play one song. The reaction was immediate. Some people looked excited. Others looked shocked. A few looked angry. Are you serious? A man in the expensive suit called out. You're going to let a homeless person touch your piano? This is outrageous, a woman with pearl earrings added. I didn't come here to watch some street performance. But a young couple at a corner table looked interested. I think it sounds fun, the woman said to her boyfriend. Let's see what happens. Tony held up his hand to quiet everyone. She's promised to leave peacefully if you don't enjoy her performance. I'm asking you all to give her a chance. Maria stood near the entrance, feeling all the eyes on her. She felt dirty and out of place. Her clothes smelled bad. Her hair was messy. She probably looked like she did not belong in this beautiful room with its white tablecloths and crystal glasses. David, the assistant manager, came up to Tony. "Boss, are you sure about this?" he whispered. "What if she damages the piano? What if the customers get upset and leave?" "It's too late now," Tony whispered back. "We have to see this through." Richardson found an empty table where he could watch everything. He took out his phone to record video. This was definitely going to make an interesting story for his newspaper column. Maria walked slowly toward the piano. It was even more beautiful up close. The black wood was polished to a perfect shine. The keys were white as snow. This was an expensive instrument, the kind she used to play in concert halls. She remembered her own piano, the one she had to sell when she lost her apartment. It had been smaller than this one, but she had loved it like a friend. Selling it had felt like cutting off a piece of her soul. "Wait," called out a woman sitting near the piano. "What if she has diseases? Should she be touching things in a restaurant?" Several other customers nodded in agreement. They were worried about germs and cleanliness. Maria felt her face burn with shame. She knew she was not clean. She had not had a proper shower in weeks. Tony looked uncomfortable. He had not thought about health concerns. "Ma'am," he said to Maria, "do you need to wash your hands first?" "Yes, please," Maria said quietly. "That would be good." Tony pointed toward the restroom. "Right over there." Maria walked to the bathroom, feeling everyone's eyes following her. In the restroom, she looked at herself in the mirror. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy and tangled. Her face was dirty. Her clothes were stained and wrinkled. She washed her hands carefully with the expensive soap. The water felt wonderful on her skin. She splashed some water on her face and tried to smooth down her hair. It did not help much, but at least she felt a little cleaner. When she came back out, the restaurant was buzzing with conversation. People were talking about what was about to happen. Some were betting that she could not really play. Others were wondering if this was some kind of publicity stunt. Maria approached the piano bench. It was made of the same polished black wood as the piano. She had sat on benches like this thousands of times before, but never feeling so nervous. "What are you going to play?" Richardson asked her. Maria thought for a moment. She needed to choose something that would touch people's hearts, something that would make them forget about her appearance and remember that she was human. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major," she said. A few people in the restaurant recognized the name. It was a famous piece, beautiful and emotional. If she could really play it well, it would be impressive. "That's a difficult piece," said a woman who had studied piano when she was younger. "It requires real skill," Maria nodded. "I know." She sat down on the bench and adjusted the height. The piano was set up perfectly. She placed her feet on the pedals and positioned her hands above the keys. For a moment, she just sat there preparing herself. The restaurant was completely quiet now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Maria looked at her hands hovering over the keys. They were dirty and rough from living on the streets. Her fingernails were broken and uneven. These were not the hands of a concert pianist anymore. But maybe, just maybe, they still remembered how to make music. "Whenever you're ready," Tony said gently. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about all the times she had played this piece before. In her apartment when she was practicing, in concert halls filled with people in evening gowns and tuxedos. For her mother when she was sick in the hospital, the music was still inside her. It had been waiting patiently through all the months of pain and loss and desperation. Now it was time to let it out. Some customers looked skeptical. They expected her to hit a few wrong notes and then give up. Others were openly hostile, angry that their meal was being interrupted by what they saw as a ridiculous stunt. "This is stupid," muttered the man in the expensive suit. "She's probably going to bang on the keys like a child." "I'm calling this whole thing off if she makes a mess," said the woman with pearl earrings. But Richardson leaned forward in his seat. He had interviewed enough musicians to recognize the way Maria was preparing herself. The way she positioned her hands, adjusted the bench, tested the pedals. These were the actions of someone who really knew instruments. A teenage girl at a table with her parents looked excited. "I hope she's good," she whispered. "This is like something from a movie." Her father shook his head. "Don't get your hopes up, sweetheart. This is probably just a scam to get sympathy money." Maria opened her eyes and looked at the keys one more time. They were beautiful and clean and perfectly tuned. She had not played a piano this nice in over a year. Her fingers were eager to touch them. The room was so quiet she could hear people breathing. She could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Everyone was waiting. This was it. This was her moment. Either she would prove that she was still the musician she used to be, or she would embarrass herself in front of all these people and lose her last chance for dignity. Maria placed her fingers on the keys. Maria's fingers touched the keys and the first note filled the restaurant. It was soft and gentle like a whisper. The sound was perfect, clear and sweet and exactly right. Several people in the audience looked surprised. They had expected something rough or amateur, but this first note was beautiful. Then came the second note and the third. Maria's fingers began to move across the keyboard with grace and confidence. The opening melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from the piano like water from a spring. The transformation was immediate and shocking. The woman sitting at the piano bench was no longer a homeless beggar in dirty clothes. She was a musician. Her posture changed. Her face changed. Her whole being changed as the music took control of her body and soul. Her fingers moved with incredible precision. Each note was placed exactly where it belonged. The rhythm was perfect. The dynamics were perfect. 20 years of training and practice and love for music poured out through her fingertips. The restaurant fell into complete silence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks and knives were set down quietly on plates. Coffee cups were forgotten. Even the kitchen staff stopped their work to listen. The melody was hauntingly beautiful. It started simple and tender like a lullaby. But as Maria continued to play, the music grew more complex and emotional. Her left hand provided a steady, flowing accompaniment, while her right hand danced across the higher keys with the main melody. The man in the expensive suit, who had been so critical before, found his mouth hanging open in shock. He had expected noise and embarrassment. Instead, he was hearing one of the most beautiful piano performances of his life. The woman with pearl earrings stopped complaining and started listening. Really listening. The music was touching something deep inside her heart. She had not heard classical music this beautiful in years. Maria's eyes were closed now. She was lost in the music, remembering who she used to be. Her fingers knew exactly where to go without her having to think about it. The muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice was still there, buried under months of pain but not destroyed. The teenage girl at the table with her parents had tears forming in her eyes. She played piano herself, though not nearly at this level. She could recognize incredible skill when she heard it. This was not amateur playing. This was professional concert-level performance. "Dad," she whispered to her father. "She's amazing." Her father nodded, unable to speak. He felt ashamed for doubting her. This woman was clearly a trained musician. How had she ended up on the streets? Richardson was scribbling notes as fast as he could write. This was the most incredible story he had encountered in his 20 years as a food critic. A homeless woman playing classical piano in a restaurant with the skill of a concert hall performer. His readers would never believe it unless he documented every detail. The music continued to build in emotion and complexity. Maria's hands moved faster now, playing intricate passages that required years of training to master. Her left hand and right hand worked together in perfect coordination, creating layers of melody and harmony that filled the room with beauty. An elderly woman at a corner table began to cry. The music reminded her of her late husband, who had loved classical piano. They used to attend concerts together when they were young. Hearing this piece played so beautifully brought back memories of happier times. Tony stood near the kitchen door, completely amazed. He had expected maybe a simple tune, played reasonably well if they were lucky. He had never imagined anything like this. The homeless woman was playing his piano better than any professional musician he had ever hired for special events. David, his assistant manager, looked like he had seen a ghost. All his concerns about damage to the piano and upset customers seemed foolish now. The customers were not upset. They were mesmerized. A young couple who had been arguing about money when they came in found themselves holding hands across their table. The music was so beautiful and moving that their petty problems seemed unimportant. They looked at each other with love instead of anger. Maria reached the most difficult part of the piece, where the melody soared into the upper register of the piano. Her right hand moved rapidly across the keys, playing notes that required incredible finger strength and dexterity. But she played them flawlessly, as if they were as easy as breathing. The businessman who had told her to get a job earlier felt sick to his stomach. He realized how cruel he had been to someone who possessed such extraordinary talent. How had society failed this woman so badly that she ended up homeless on the streets? A waiter who had been carrying a tray of dishes stopped in the middle of the dining room. He was so captivated by the music that he forgot where he was going. He just stood there listening, holding the tray with tears streaming down his face. The music was not just technically perfect. It was emotionally devastating. Maria was pouring her entire life story into this performance. Every note carried the weight of her losses, her pain, her hopes, and her dreams. The audience could feel all of it. A successful lawyer at a table near the window thought about his own life. He worked 16 hours a day making money. But when was the last time he had experienced something this beautiful? When was the last time he had felt moved by art or music or anything that mattered beyond profit and success? The piano seemed to sing under Maria's touch. She used the pedals expertly to create rich, sustained harmonies. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, wrapping around the listeners like a warm embrace. Maria's face showed deep concentration and emotion. This was more than just playing notes on a keyboard. This was communication. She was speaking to everyone in the room through the universal language of music. A mother sitting with her 2 young children watched in amazement as her kids, who were usually restless and noisy in restaurants, sat perfectly still and quiet. Even they could sense that something special was happening. The piece built toward its climax where the melody became more passionate and urgent. Maria's hands moved with incredible speed and accuracy, playing passages that would challenge even professional concert pianists. But she made it look effortless. Richardson realized he was witnessing something that would change how he thought about talent and human dignity forever. This woman had been dismissed and ignored by society, treated like garbage on the street. But she possessed a gift that could move people to tears and change their hearts. The kitchen staff had completely abandoned their work now. Cooks and dishwashers and servers all stood in the doorway leading to the dining room, listening with wonder and disbelief. None of them had ever heard anything like this before. As the music approached its end, Maria played the final gentle phrases with such tenderness and beauty that several people in the audience began to sob openly. The melody faded away slowly, like the sun setting on a perfect day. When the last note died away, the restaurant remained in complete silence for several long seconds. Nobody wanted to break the spell. The music had transported everyone to a different world, and they were reluctant to return to reality. Maria sat at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys. She opened her eyes slowly as if waking from a beautiful dream. For those few minutes she had been herself again. She had been Maria Santos, the pianist. Not the homeless woman, not the beggar, but the artist she was meant to be. The silence stretched on. Maria began to worry. Had she done something wrong? Had the performance been a failure? She looked around the room at the faces staring at her, trying to read their expressions. Then slowly one person began to clap. The first person to clap was the teenage girl who played piano herself. She recognized true talent when she heard it. Her clapping was slow and respectful, the kind of applause reserved for truly great performances. Then her parents joined in. Then the elderly woman who had been crying. One by one, every person in the restaurant began to applaud. But this was not ordinary clapping. This was the kind of applause that comes from deep emotion, from being moved in a way that words cannot express. Soon everyone was on their feet. The entire restaurant erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the walls. People were clapping and cheering, and some were still crying. The sound was thunderous and overwhelming. "Bravo!" called out the man in the expensive suit. The same man who had told Maria to get a job just an hour before. His face was red with emotion and what might have been shame. "Bravo, that was incredible!" "Amazing!" shouted the woman with pearl earrings. "Absolutely amazing." Maria sat at the piano bench in shock. She had not heard applause like this in over 2 years. She had forgotten what it felt like to receive such appreciation for her music. The sound washed over her like a warm wave, healing wounds she had forgotten she carried. Richardson was clapping harder than anyone. He had been to hundreds of concerts and performances in his career as a food critic and arts reviewer. He had heard professional orchestras and world-famous soloists, but he had never been more moved by a musical performance than he was right now. The businessman who had been so cruel earlier pushed through the crowd toward Maria. When he reached the piano, he pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you. Please take this." He held out a $100 bill. "No, no," Maria said, overwhelmed. "You don't have to." "Please," the man insisted. "I need to do something. I was terrible to you. I judged you without knowing anything about who you are." Other people began approaching Maria with money and apologies. The woman with the fur coat, who had been so disgusted earlier, now had tears streaming down her face. "I'm ashamed of myself," she said. "You have such a beautiful gift. How could I have been so blind?" A young mother approached with her children. "My kids want to thank you," she said. "They've never heard classical music before. You've given them something special." The little boy looked up at Maria with wide eyes. "That was the most beautiful thing I ever heard," he said. "Are you a princess?" Maria laughed through her tears. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who loves music." Tony emerged from the crowd carrying a plate piled high with food. It was the finest meal his kitchen could prepare: tender roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and warm bread. The plate was decorated beautifully, like something served to the most important customers. "This is for you," Tony said, setting the plate on a nearby table. "With my deepest respect and apologies." Maria looked at the food and started crying harder. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with such kindness and dignity. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." A young woman in an elegant dress approached Maria. She had an air of sophistication and education about her. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm Sarah Chen. I play violin with the City Symphony Orchestra. What you just played was extraordinary. Where did you study?" "The Royal Academy of Music in London," Maria replied, wiping her eyes. "And the Conservatory in Vienna." Sarah's eyes widened. These were two of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Only the most talented students were accepted there. "You're a professionally trained concert pianist," she said. "I was," Maria said sadly. "A long time ago." "Talent like that doesn't disappear," Sarah said firmly. "You're still a concert pianist. What happened to you?" Maria hesitated. She was not used to people asking about her story with genuine interest and kindness. "My mother got sick," she said quietly. "Cancer. I spent everything I had trying to save her. When she died, I fell apart. I started drinking. I lost my career, my home, everything." The crowd around them had grown quiet listening to Maria's story. People who had been celebrating moments before now looked sad and thoughtful. "How long have you been homeless?" Richardson asked gently. 8 months, Maria replied. "I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's hard when you don't have an address or clean clothes for job interviews." An well-dressed older gentleman stepped forward. "I'm Robert Hamilton," he said. "I'm on the board of directors for the Arts Center downtown. We need to talk." "I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh," said a woman in a business suit. "I run a nonprofit that helps people experiencing homelessness. I want to help you." More and more people began introducing themselves and offering assistance. A real estate agent offered to help find housing. A clothing store owner offered free clothes for job interviews. A bank manager offered to help with financial planning. Maria felt overwhelmed by the kindness. For months, people had walked past her like she was invisible. Now everyone wanted to help. It was almost too much to process. Wait, Tony called out, trying to restore some order. "Let's give her some space. She needs to eat." People backed away slightly, but they continued to watch Maria with admiration and respect. The transformation in their attitudes was complete. An hour ago, they had seen her as a nuisance to be removed. Now they saw her as a remarkable human being with extraordinary talent. Maria sat down at the table with the plate of food Tony had brought her. She picked up the fork with trembling hands. The food smelled incredible. She took a small bite of the chicken and closed her eyes. It was the most delicious thing she had tasted in months. "Take your time," Tony said kindly. "There's no rush." As Maria ate, people continued to approach her with offers of help and words of appreciation. A music teacher offered free piano lessons to children in her honor. A restaurant owner from across the street offered her a job playing piano during dinner hours. Richardson was still taking notes furiously. This was going to be the most important article he had ever written. Not just about food, but about human dignity and the power of art to change hearts and minds. "I have to ask," Richardson said to Maria between bites. How did you maintain such incredible skill? Most musicians would lose their ability after months without practice. Maria smiled for the first time in months. I practiced in my mind, she said. Every night when I tried to sleep, I would play entire concerts in my head. My fingers would move in the air, pressing invisible keys. I could hear every note perfectly. That's remarkable, said Sarah, the violinist. Mental practice is a real technique, but to maintain that level of skill without touching a piano for months? It shows incredible dedication and natural ability. A group of music students from the local college had heard about what was happening and rushed over to the restaurant. They stood at the windows looking in with amazement. Word was spreading quickly through the city that something extraordinary was taking place at Antonio's fine dining. The teenager who had first applauded approached Maria shyly. Could you maybe play another piece? She asked hopefully. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Other people immediately agreed. Yes, please, called out several voices. Play another piece. Maria looked around at all the eager faces. These people who had been so hostile an hour before now wanted to hear more of her music. She felt a spark of joy that she had not experienced in months. Would that be all right? She asked Tony. I don't want to disturb your business, Tony laughed. Are you kidding? This is the best thing that's ever happened to my restaurant. Please play as much as you want. Maria finished eating and returned to the piano. The crowd gathered around again, but this time they were respectful and appreciative. She positioned her hands over the keys and began to play Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11. Once again, the restaurant filled with the most beautiful music anyone had ever heard. But this time, Maria was not playing out of desperation. She was playing out of joy, sharing her gift with people who could truly appreciate it. Outside on the street, more people were gathering. They had heard the music through the windows and wanted to know what was happening. The crowd was growing larger by the minute, all drawn by the incredible sound of Maria's playing. When Maria finished the Mozart piece, the applause was even louder than before. People were not just clapping now. They were cheering and calling out praise. The sound filled the restaurant and spilled out onto the street where a growing crowd was gathering. Incredible, shouted Robert Hamilton, the Arts Center board member. I haven't heard playing like that since I saw Horowitz perform in Carnegie Hall. She's better than most of the pianists we feature at the symphony, Sarah the violinist told everyone around her. This is world-class talent. Maria felt like she was in a dream. For so many months she had felt worthless and forgotten. People had treated her like she was nothing, like she had no value as a human being. Now she was surrounded by respect and admiration. The same hands that had been dismissed as dirty and dangerous were being praised for their incredible skill. Richardson approached Maria as she stood up from the piano bench. I have to ask you something important, he said. Would you be willing to be interviewed for my newspaper? I think people need to hear your story. Maria hesitated. She had spent months trying to be invisible, trying not to be noticed. The idea of being in a newspaper was frightening. I don't know, she said quietly. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention. Think about it, Richardson said gently. Your story could help other people. It could change how society treats homeless individuals. You could show the world that every person has value and dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Dr. Walsh, the nonprofit director, nodded in agreement. He's right. Your experience could help us raise awareness and funding for programs that assist people experiencing homelessness. Tony was beaming with pride. His restaurant had never hosted anything like this before. Customers were staying long past their usual dining time, not wanting to leave. The atmosphere was electric with excitement and emotion. Maria, Tony said, I have a proposition for you. Everyone turned to listen. They could tell by Tony's tone that he was about to say something important. I would like to offer you a job, Tony continued. Not charity, a real job. I want you to be our evening pianist. 6 nights a week, 3 hours each night. Full salary, health benefits, and tips. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Maria's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Are you serious? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dead serious, Tony replied. What you did here today was magic. You turned my restaurant into a concert hall. My customers will come back just to hear you play. You'll be good for business, and I'll be proud to have you as part of my team. Maria started crying again, but these were tears of joy and relief. Yes, she said through her sobs. Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much. The businessman who had been cruel to her earlier pushed forward again. I want to do something too, he announced. I'm going to pay for your first month's rent wherever you decide to live. It's the least I can do after how terribly I treated you. And I'll provide a complete professional wardrobe, added the woman with the fur coat. Beautiful dresses for your performances. More offers of help came from all directions. A hotel manager offered free accommodation until she found permanent housing. A bank manager offered to help her open accounts and rebuild her credit. A dentist offered free dental care. A hairstylist offered to help her prepare for her new job. Maria was overwhelmed by the generosity. I don't know what to say, she said. This morning I was sitting on the street with nothing. Now you're all offering me a new life. You earned it, said the teenage piano student. Your music touched all our hearts. You reminded us what's really important in life. Her father nodded. You made me realize how quick I am to judge people without knowing their stories. I'm ashamed of some of the assumptions I've made about homeless individuals. Outside, the crowd on the street was getting larger. People were pressing against the windows, trying to see what was happening inside. Some had heard the music from blocks away and came to investigate. Others had received text messages from friends inside the restaurant. A local news crew arrived, having heard reports of something unusual happening at Antonio's. The reporter tried to push through the crowd outside to get into the restaurant. What's going on in there? The reporter asked people on the street. There's a homeless woman playing piano, someone explained. But she's not just playing, she's incredible. Like professional concert level incredible. It's the most beautiful music I've ever heard, added another person. Everyone inside is crying and cheering. It's amazing. Inside, Maria had agreed to play one more piece. This time she chose Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, one of the most beloved pieces in classical music. As soon as people recognized the opening notes, they fell silent again. The first movement of the sonata was gentle and melancholy, like moonlight on water. Maria played it with such emotion and sensitivity that many people felt transported to another world. The music seemed to flow directly from her heart to theirs. Sarah, the violinist, was taking video with her phone. I have to share this with my colleagues at the symphony, she whispered to someone nearby. They won't believe this unless they see it. A famous pianist who lived in the city happened to be walking by the restaurant. He heard the music through the windows and stopped in amazement. He recognized the piece and the incredible skill with which it was being played. He pushed through the crowd outside and managed to get inside. When he saw Maria at the piano, he was stunned. He had performed this same piece in concert halls around the world, but he had rarely heard it played with such depth and feeling. As soon as she finished, he approached her. Excuse me, he said. I'm David Chen. I'm a pianist with the National Symphony. What you just played was extraordinary. The crowd around them gasped. David Chen was famous in the classical music world. He had recordings that sold millions of copies and performed for presidents and royalty. I've been playing professionally for 30 years, David continued, and I can honestly say that was one of the finest performances of that piece I've ever heard. Where have you been performing recently? Nowhere, Maria said sadly. I've been homeless for 8 months. David looked shocked. That's impossible. Talent like yours doesn't just disappear from the music world. What happened? Maria told her story again, and David listened with growing sadness and anger. This is a tragedy, he said. The music world lost a treasure when you disappeared. We need to fix this immediately. Tony has already offered me a job here, Maria said with a smile. That's wonderful, David replied. But you're meant for more than restaurant performances. You should be on concert stages. Let me make some calls. I know people who need to hear you play. Richardson was frantically taking notes. This story was getting bigger and more incredible by the minute. A homeless woman who turned out to be a world-class pianist, discovered by accident in a restaurant, now being championed by famous musicians. It was like something from a movie. The teenage piano student approached Maria again. Could you teach me sometime? She asked hopefully. I've been playing for 5 years, but hearing you play makes me realize how much I still need to learn. I would love to teach you, Maria said warmly. Music should be shared. That's how it grows and survives. Tony called for everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, I want to make this official. Starting tomorrow evening, Maria Santos will be performing here every night except Sundays. I hope you'll all come back to hear her. The crowd cheered and applauded again. Several people immediately made reservations for the next evening. Others said they would bring friends and family members. "This is just the beginning," Robert Hamilton told Maria. "I'm going to arrange for you to audition with our concert series. We feature world-class musicians, and you definitely qualify. And I want to interview you for our podcast about remarkable people," added Dr. Walsh. "Your story needs to be heard." As the excitement continued, Maria sat down for a moment to process everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, her entire life had changed. She had gone from being invisible and worthless to being celebrated and valued. But more than the job offers and the money and the attention, what meant the most to her was the way people were looking at her now. They saw her as a human being with dignity and worth. They saw her talent and her potential instead of just her circumstances. The music had done that. The music had reminded everyone in the room that she was more than her appearance or her situation. She was an artist, a person with gifts to share with the world. As the evening wore on, people began to reluctantly leave the restaurant. But they all promised to return. Many exchanged contact information with Maria, wanting to help her in various ways. Richardson stayed until the end, continuing to ask questions and take notes. "This is going to be front-page news," he told Tony. "Your restaurant is going to be famous." "Good," Tony replied. "But more importantly, we helped someone who deserved help. That's what my father would have wanted." As the crowd finally thinned out, Maria sat at the piano one more time. She played a quiet, gentle piece just for herself. It was a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected kindness she had received and hope for the future that suddenly seemed bright again. The next morning, Richardson's article appeared on the front page of the city's largest newspaper. The headline read, "Homeless Pianist Brings Concert Hall to Local Restaurant." The article told Maria's complete story, from her training at prestigious music schools to her fall into homelessness, and finally to her incredible performance at Antonio's. Within hours, the story was being shared thousands of times on social media. Local television stations picked it up for their morning news shows. Radio hosts were talking about it between songs. The video that Sarah had taken with her phone was being watched by millions of people around the world. Maria woke up in a hotel room that the hotel manager had given her for free. She had slept in a real bed with clean sheets for the first time in 8 months. When she turned on the television, she was shocked to see her own face on the morning news. "The story of Maria Santos has touched hearts around the world," the news anchor was saying. "The classically trained pianist who has been homeless for 8 months gave an impromptu concert yesterday that moved an entire restaurant to tears." Maria's phone, which a kind customer had helped her buy the day before, was ringing constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Music promoters wanted to discuss concerts. People from around the country were calling to offer help and support. But the call that meant the most came from David Chen, the famous pianist she had met the day before. "Maria," he said, "I've spoken with the director of the Symphony Hall. They want you to perform as a guest soloist next month. Are you interested?" Maria could hardly believe what she was hearing. Symphony Hall was the most prestigious concert venue in the city. She had dreamed of performing there when she was a student, but had never imagined it would actually happen. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I would be honored." "Wonderful," David replied. "We'll start rehearsals next week. I'll personally help you prepare." Meanwhile, at Antonio's restaurant, Tony was dealing with his own flood of attention. The phone had been ringing all morning with people wanting to make reservations. The restaurant was booked solid for the next 2 months. "This is incredible," David, his assistant manager, said as he looked at the reservation book. "We've never been this busy." "It's all because of Maria," Tony replied with a smile. "She brought magic to our little restaurant." Dr. Walsh, the nonprofit director, had been busy too. The story of Maria's transformation had inspired thousands of people to donate money to help homeless individuals. In just one day, her organization had received more donations than they usually collected in a month. "Maria's story is changing how people think about homelessness," Dr. Walsh told a reporter. "People are realizing that anyone can fall on hard times and that every person has value and potential." Robert Hamilton from the Arts Center had been making calls all morning. He had arranged for Maria to perform in their upcoming concert series, and he was working on getting her a recording contract with a major music label. "Talent like hers comes along once in a generation," he told his colleagues. "We need to make sure the world gets to hear her music." At the hotel, Maria was getting ready for her first day of work at Antonio's. The clothing store owner had delivered a beautiful black dress for her to wear during performances. The hairstylist had come to the hotel to help her prepare. For the first time in months, Maria looked like the professional musician she had always been. When she arrived at the restaurant that evening, there was a line of people waiting outside. Tony had hired extra security to help manage the crowd. Everyone wanted to hear the homeless pianist who had become famous overnight. "Maria," called out a familiar voice. It was the teenage girl who had first applauded her performance. She was standing in line with her parents, waiting to get into the restaurant. "Thank you for coming back," Maria said warmly. "Your support yesterday meant everything to me." "We wouldn't miss it," the girl replied. "You inspired me to practice harder. I want to be able to play like you someday." Inside the restaurant, Maria walked to the piano that had changed her life. The same instrument that had seemed impossible to reach just 24 hours ago was now hers to play every evening. Tony had even put a small plaque next to it that read, "Maria Santos, Resident Pianist." The crowd fell silent as Maria sat down at the piano bench. She looked out at all the faces looking back at her with anticipation and respect. These were not the same hostile expressions she had faced the day before. These people had come specifically to hear her music. "Good evening," Maria said to the audience. "Before I begin, I want to thank all of you for giving me a chance yesterday when I had lost hope. Your kindness saved my life." The audience applauded warmly. Then Maria began to play. She started with the same Chopin piece that had started everything the day before. But tonight it sounded even more beautiful because it was played with joy instead of desperation. As the weeks passed, Maria's story continued to spread around the world. She received letters from musicians, homeless individuals, and ordinary people who had been inspired by her journey. Many shared their own stories of struggle and redemption. A month later, Maria walked onto the stage at Symphony Hall, wearing an elegant gown provided by a famous designer who had heard her story. The concert hall was sold out. In the audience were many of the people who had witnessed her first performance at Antonio's, including Tony Richardson and the teenage piano student. As Maria sat down at the magnificent concert grand piano, she thought about how much her life had changed. She now had an apartment, a steady income, and most importantly, her dignity restored. But none of it would have happened without that moment of desperate courage when she asked Tony for a chance to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the concert hall. The audience was mesmerized by the power and beauty of Maria's performance. This was the same woman who had been sitting on concrete steps begging for food just 2 months earlier. When the concerto ended, the audience erupted in the longest standing ovation in the hall's history. People were crying, cheering, and calling out bravo. Maria stood at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Later that evening, at the reception after the concert, Maria was surrounded by music lovers, critics, and fellow musicians. A recording executive approached her with a contract offer. A concert promoter wanted to book her for a European tour. A music conservatory offered her a teaching position. But the person Maria was most happy to see was the teenage girl who had supported her from the beginning. The girl had been given special permission to attend the reception with her parents. "You did it," the girl said with tears in her eyes. "You made it back to where you belong." "We all did it together," Maria replied. "Your belief in me gave me strength when I had none left." Dr. Walsh approached them with exciting news. "Maria, the foundation has decided to establish a scholarship program in your name. It will help homeless individuals with artistic talents get back on their feet." "That's wonderful," Maria said. "Everyone deserves a second chance." As the evening wound down, Maria stepped outside onto the steps of Symphony Hall. Just 2 months ago, she had been sleeping on steps like these, cold and hungry and forgotten. Now she stood on these steps as a celebrated artist, surrounded by people who respected and valued her. She looked up at the stars and thought about her mother, who had always believed in her musical gifts. "I made it, Mama," she whispered. "I found my way back to the music." The next morning, Richardson published his follow-up article about Maria's concert debut. The headline read, "From Street to Symphony, a story of hope and human dignity." The article became one of the most widely shared news stories of the year. Maria's transformation had touched millions of people around the world. Her story reminded everyone that circumstances can change quickly. That talent and worth are not determined by appearance or social status, and that a single act of kindness can change a life forever. 6 months later, Maria was touring internationally, performing in the world's greatest concert halls. But every few weeks, she returned to Antonio's restaurant to play for the customers who had first believed in her. Tony always saved the same table for the businessman who had apologized, the woman with the fur coat who had learned not to judge, and the teenage pianist who continued to study and improve. This is where it all started, Maria would tell new audiences. This is where strangers became friends, where judgment became understanding, and where music reminded us all of our shared humanity. Maria's story became a symbol of hope for people facing difficult times. It showed that no matter how far someone falls, they can rise again with talent, determination, and the kindness of others. It proved that every person on the street has a story, and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And every evening at Antonio's fine dining, beautiful piano music filled the air, reminding everyone who heard it that miracles can happen when we open our hearts to the possibility that there is more to people than what we see on the surface. The piano that had seemed impossible for a homeless woman to touch had become the instrument of her redemption. The music that had been silenced by poverty and prejudice was now heard and celebrated around the world.